themselves compiling. So that could be proactively disclosed. So it probably is two-pronged. What information is the department regularly holding, and what information is regularly being asked for? It makes it simpler, obviously, if you can proactively disclose things rather than have to always respond to a FIPA request.
The member from Notre Dame.
The Ombudsman's report asked the government to proactively release documents to cut down on FIPA delays. Can the minister explain how it is decided what gets posted to the proactive disclosure site and when? So for example, why aren't contracts publicly disclosed? Like who the successful proponents were in their respective contracts? You can FIPA a contract.
The First Minister.
So we would have to talk to Central Services on who issues the contracts and goes through that, the MERCS program, the broad across Canada tendering program. We were under the impression that MERCS would disclose who was rewarded the contract generally, but we'd have to speak to Central Services to see what kind of information is disclosed.
Member from Notre Dame.
What efforts is your government taking to disclose more on the proactive disclosure site? Do you have like a committee that's in charge of this? Do you have staff that are, are focused on that kind of goal?
First Minister.
Sort of an annual process where we engage with the departments is, do a check to see what information is being regularly asked for that hasn't already been proactively disclosed, or if there's new information that they're collecting that would make sense to just proactively disclose. So it really is that interaction with the individual departments which hold the information.
The member for Notre Dame.
Mr. Chair, we're going to be going on to records management now. On page 91 of the budget, it states, as we move past COVID-19, digital technologies, platforms, and service contracts will provide government with the capabilities it needs to continue transforming the public service. Below are some initiatives to support the digital transformation, document and record management modernization, modernizing the tools and processes that support correspondence and workflow, approval management and tracking of critical government documents such as briefing notes, Treasury Board and Cabinet submissions, estimates materials, speaking notes, public correspondence, etc. Can the minister please explain in more detail what modernizing the tools and process actually means?
The First Minister.
Yeah, I mean, it is really a cross-government discussion about what's the best way to manage information. I think every government has struggled with this at different times because technology continues to change, and what it is that's being warehoused in terms of records continues to change. So it's an ongoing discussion, not specifically just with LPA, but with departments across government. It's also a bit of a learning experience outside of COVID. I think part of the challenge in government is that most of the experiences with COVID, people sometimes focus on as being negative, but there's also been great opportunities to do things that otherwise might have taken decades or may never have happened at all, but for the need to do it because of the pandemic. So I mean, it's really a cross-government discussion about how best to manage information and records.
Member from Notre Dame.
How exactly is record management changing? Are documents and records going to be labeled or categorized differently now?
First Minister.
Part of that ongoing discussion across government and departments, moving through the pandemic, about what the experiences and learnings have been about how best to store information and access it. I can assure the member there hasn't been any specific decisions made that would look or feel different from what is currently happening.
Member from Notre Dame.
Will you be, Mr. Chair, will the minister be moving away from AIM software? If yes, what would you be switching to?
First Minister.
I'm not aware of any decision to move away from Ames, that would be, I suppose, a central service decision, but I've not been made aware of that, any movement away from Ames.
Member from Notre Dame.
What kind of yearly budget will you be allocating to the data, will the minister be allocating to data management modernization?
The First Minister.
That budget would likely be housed in central services as sort of the central deposit for government services, hence the name of the department.
Member from Notre Dame.
Would the minister be able to get that information to me at a later date?
First Minister.
I mean, I can get you the budgets for central services. I don't know that there's been a determination or line item specifically for the issue that the member is asking questions about.
Member from Notre Dame.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the minister if this data management modernization process is in congruence with his open government initiatives.
First Minister.
Everything is put through the lens of an open government policy. I think the government has tried to be open and transparent about issues that sometimes can be in the eye of the beholder, and the member opposite and her colleagues might not always feel that way, and I maybe didn't always feel that way in opposition, but I think there's always a movement to try to be more open and transparent when it comes to government information where it's acceptable to do so.
Member from Notre Dame.
Mr. Chair, the next few questions will be about Elections Manitoba. Has the minister had any discussions with Elections Manitoba regarding elections and COVID-19 protocols?
First Minister.
I've not spoken directly to Shipper Verma, the Chief Electoral Officer, about that, although I have indicated that we are willing to move forward on the mail-in ballot provision, particularly when it comes to any sort of impending by-elections. And of course, one will have to be scheduled in the next 6 months, which we would assume would still be sort of within the realm of a pandemic, although hopefully a fading one. But we recognize that the mail-in ballot at this particular time probably makes sense. I think it'll be the subject of Elections Manitoba committee meeting tomorrow night. But it's something that was used obviously in the federal election and probably should be considered for the upcoming by-election in Fort White.
Member from Notre Dame.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the minister what are some of the main concerns or needs that need to be addressed in order to hold an election during COVID-19, apart from mail-in ballots?
First Minister.
I mean, imagine that there'll be, questions about how individuals are receiving information, how the individual campaigns are, out going door knocking and those sort of things. I'm not sure that that can all be regulated. A lot of the parties are going to have to take their own initiatives, and it then depends where we are in the pandemic. As the member will know, waves sort of come and go. We're hopeful that the fourth wave, such as it is, will be relatively blunted, but some of that is yet to be determined, right, as we move into the fall and into the winter. But I think that whenever the by-election is called, individual parties are going to have to make some determination about what is the best way to campaign in the midst of a pandemic, depending on what the risk assessment is at that time. There is 6 months to call the by-election, or I guess a little bit less now. So it's possible that we could be into the early part of spring for there to be a by-election, and pandemic could look quite different by that time. But I think some of that will be determined by Elections Manitoba, polling stations, what it looks like entering polling stations, but a good part of it in terms of the campaigning will have to be determined by the parties itself.
Member from Notre Dame.
Does the minister plan to initiate a conversation to ensure proper protocols and resources are in place to successfully carry out the upcoming by-election?
First Minister.
It's a good question. I think that that'll be part of the discussion that happens tomorrow night with the elections commissioner. I know they have specific issues on the agenda regarding to mail-in ballots, vote anywhere proposals, strike off proposals, tabulation of ballots. Those aren't specific necessarily to the pandemic other than the mail-in ballot part of it, but there probably is an opportunity to engage with the elections officer about other issues around voting in a pandemic.
Member from Notre Dame.
Who will be, Mr. Chair, who will be making the call for when the by-election will take place?
First Minister.
The Premier makes a decision on when the by-election takes place within the legislated parameters, which I believe is 6 months from the resignation of a member. So, member for Fort White, it resigned, and the legislation requires a call or the election within 6 months. The member wasn't here, but may remember that in one by-election, the by-election that elected the now member for McPhillips, but it was for the, as the MLA for Morris, there was a 1-year wait period for that by-election to take place, and I think it took place in one of the coldest months in Manitoba recorded history.
Member from Notre Dame.
Mr. Chair, as the Minister for Public Affairs, would the Minister agree that it's in the best interest of Manitobans to release ample information on COVID-19 so that they can feel informed to make decisions and respond adequately?
First Minister.
Yes, I think information is important when it comes to COVID-19, probably from, I mean, I know this drifts more into the health perspective, and so I should be careful because there is a health estimates taking place down the hall, but having been the health minister or the acting health minister for a period of time in the pandemic and the former health minister, information is important. I think that there's more information being released from a health perspective now than there has been in our time as legislators and probably in our living memory in terms of health information that is being released.
Member from Notre Dame.
Why hasn't the Minister's government released regional test positivity rates, either by health region or district, to help Manitobans know where the risk is and what is happening in their own backyards?
The First Minister.
Those decisions are made by the Chief Provincial Public Health Officer based on what they believe is the right information to be released for Manitobans to make decisions. I have confidence and faith in Dr. Brent Roussin and the way that he's performed his duties over the last, well, not just the last 18 months, because he was the provincial health officer before that too, but certainly during the pandemic.
Member from Notre Dame.
Mr. Chair, but doesn't the Minister have the power to decide after medical officers of health provide that type of advice?
First Minister.
I think the member is asking whether or not we should overrule the Chief Provincial Public Health Officer. That's probably a dangerous path to move down.
Member from Notre Dame.
Has the Minister had any discussions with Public Health and or the Minister of Health with releasing such information on a regular basis?
The First Minister.
Discussions with, in the other role that I'm currently acting in, I have discussions with Public Health and the Minister of Health often, certainly with the Minister of Health almost daily, and we rely on the advice of Chief Provincial Public Health Officer about what information is the important information to release.
Member from Notre Dame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Has the Minister or his government ever overruled any of the advice or decisions that Public Health has made?
The First Minister.
Member will know I've not been the health minister for the majority of this pandemic. I was the acting health minister for 2 or 3 months. It felt longer in the spring during the third wave, and I certainly remember following the public health advice as the acting health minister.
Member from Notre Dame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that the Minister said that he's confirmed that he has never is not aware of any overruling, but is he aware of any member of his government overruling decisions made by public health?
First Minister.
I think that the member is drifted pretty far into a department that isn't related to this department. And I mean, I think that the health estimates are happening just down the hall. And if there's more specific questions she has related to the pandemic or health, that's probably the appropriate place to pose those questions.
Member from Notre Dame.
Dr. Roussin previously explained that Manitoba's fourth wave was more delayed than what earlier projections had shown, but we are on the severe trajectory right now. Manitobans haven't seen updated modeling in quite some time, so when can Manitobans expect to see updated modeling?
First Minister.
Whenever public health determines that it's time to release it.
Member from Notre Dame.
Public knowledge helps public health. Releasing data can help those who are hesitant or have been putting off getting vaccinated to finally make the decision to get vaccinated. It also helps people make smarter, safer public health decisions if they know there is potentially a greater risk. Will the minister commit to his government releasing updated modeling this week so that Manitobans know what's to come in the fourth wave?
First Minister.
So I'm a little confused because I sort of took it from the member's questions a little bit ago that she would have been adverse to us interfering or overruling, in her words, public health. Now it seems that she's advocating that we direct or overrule public health and things they may or may not want to do. We committed months ago that it was good to have public modeling available. Public health has been releasing data as they have it. I don't think modeling happens every day, but they have been regularly releasing modeling, and I support that.
Member from Notre Dame.
I'd like to ask a few questions about the Ombudsman's review of the politicization of the civil service. What work has been done to improve the vetting for partisan messaging in government-issued documents, and specifically in news releases?
First Minister.
I'm advised from officials that there is a process that's being reviewed to ensure that government messaging isn't political. Recognizing again that's sometimes in the eye of the beholder, depending what something is political or not. That particular portion of government, when it comes to communications, is housed in the Department of Finance right now. But I think it's fair to say that review is ongoing to ensure that communications isn't politicized. I don't think anybody wants that, nor am I certain that it's ever intentional. But again, sometimes these things become a bit subjective in terms of how people view them. But it's important to ensure that government messaging isn't drifting into the realm of politicization.
Member from Notre Dame.
So it's been 2 years after the Scheer news release, and Communication Services Manitoba is still drafting a procedure on vetting news releases and a separate guidance on political impartial communications. The Ombudsman expressed concern that there's still no updated policy as of this month, and pointing to clear rules that already exist in other provinces. Has Communication Services Manitoba drafted a procedure yet on vetting news releases? The minister has indicated not yet, but why not? When will this be complete?
First Minister.
Communication Services is housed in the Department of Finance, so you have to ask that question to the Department of Finance.
Member from Notre Dame.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to go back to my win. So I'd just like to confirm with the minister that for example, the health spending estimates book. So in 2020, we went from 145 pages to a 32-page summary. For the families estimates book, we went from 128 pages in 2020 down to now a 33-page summary. For example, in education, that estimates book, we went from 109 pages down to a 35-page summary. So the minister has indicated that it will go back to the normal, like since the 1982 from Rick Schroeder, the finance minister then, that those spending estimates book will be back to normal.
The First Minister.
Well, I'm not the finance minister, but I've indicated that it's my belief that it should.
The member from Notre Dame.
Those are all of my questions. I'd like to maybe defer to my colleague to see if he has any questions. Okay.
Member from Notre Dame.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to confirm then that this minister is not going to be making that call to return back to the previous types of estimates books that we used to have, but it will be the finance minister.
The First Minister.
Right, it's House and Finance, Treasury Board. Giving you my view on it, I've been pretty open about it. Hard for me to say who's going to be doing what in a year from now. I didn't think 3 months ago that I'd be the premier, so who knows what could be happening in 3 months from now. But that's my view of it.
Member from Notre Dame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, just to clarify, because I didn't understand. So it will be the finance minister that will be is supposed to be making that call to return the estimates book back to their previous state.
The First Minister.
It's in Treasury Board, which is in the Department of Finance. Treasury Board prepares the books.
Member from Notre Dame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that Treasury Board prepares the books, but who is responsible for that political decision to make that happen?
First Minister.
Well, I'm not confirming that it's a political decision. I think that there was a view that this was the proper way to prepare these books. I hold a different view.
A member from Notre Dame.
Prepare the books or cook the books? It was just, okay.
The First Minister.
Just so the record's clear, it would be prepare.
All of my questions, I'll defer.
No. Yeah, the member from Notre Dame.
Those are all of my questions. I'll defer to my colleague, the critic for finance, and after that, the folks from the Liberals, I guess.
Okay, the member from Fort Garry.
No, I'm going to yield my time to the member from St. Boniface.
Okay, the member from St. Boniface.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just some questions about, mostly about the FIPA report. Just on page 9 of the FIPA report, it notes that it seems to be that response times are getting a bit worse. On time has gone from 66% down to 63%. Response within 31 to 60 days, it's minor, but 19 to 20, and more than 60 days have gone from 15 to 70%. So just beyond changing the legislation, what is the government doing to ensure that departments can fulfill FIPA requests on time?
The First Minister.
Well, part of it is absolutely the legislation, and so having a little bit more time on the front end hopefully reduces the amount of times that there has to be an extension that's asked for. So we hope that turnaround time will be better, not worse. And then part of it is coordination and potentially technology changes, as mentioned to the official opposition critic, that can be certainly a part of it. And then the department is always looking at ways to streamline the requests that come in from the public and others. You know, there has been a significant increase in political party requests for freedom of information. Not that that's a bad thing, but it does put strain on the system, and it wasn't necessarily always foreseen that would be how the system would be used.
Member from St. Boniface.
Yeah, so just on the page 4 of the FIPA report, yeah, it says there were 2,500 requests submitted in 2019 and 2,102 completed. In 2020, the number went up to 2,630 applications submitted with 2,146 completed. So, I mean, the number of requests has gone up considerably. Just wondering, why are there less completed as per the total submitted, and does there need to be more staffing? Is that something that whether it's just the opinion of the premier, whether it's does there need to be more staffing to fulfill FIPA requests on time?
The First Minister.
Wouldn't rule that out as a possibility. Of course, there's other actions that are taking place, but there are the complication, the complexity of the requests are significantly more, I'm advised, than was the case even 5 or 7 years ago. So it's not just a matter of the volume, but also the nature of the requests.
Member from St. Boniface.
Yeah, and on page 7, it's a similar situation, but 22% of records were deemed as denied, where there were no records. In 2019, it was 19%. And 12% of the records being deemed as denied for exceptions to disclosure. And it's not covered in much detail, I don't think, in the report, but is there a reason for the increase in the denied records? And is there possibility, is there anything that can be done for departments to work with applicants to ensure that they're able to actually receive the requested records?
The First Minister.
Part of the reason that there's an increase in the denials, I'm advised, is because they get denied when there's already proactive disclosure. So somebody might not know that a particular record is already proactively disclosed, so they request it anyway. But then they would be denied the information, but then I suppose be referred to the proactive disclosure that's already been provided. So it looks like a denial, but it isn't really a denial.
The member from St. Boniface.
And just one last question, and then I'll cede my time. For page 9 of the annual report, under capital investments, I believe this is for the legislative building. Capital investments were underspent by 4.472 million. If the premier could explain what projects weren't completed, or if that's available, or if it's not, if it could be, if we could find out later.
The First Minister.
I'm glad that the member asked this question, because I think I probably share his view, not to put words in his mouth, but that this building, the legislature, is a treasure that Manitobans need to see preserved, and I think that they would want preserved. And I know there's a price tag to it, but the alternative is tearing it down and building something else, and I don't think anybody wants that. So we have to preserve this building. It's a beautiful historical building, but it is 100 years old, and so it is showing its age in different ways. So the $10 million that was set aside is specifically to ensure that this building is maintained for not only future generations of elected officials, but really for all Manitobans. And so the work that's happening either on the exterior of the building or on other parts of the building is going to be fully expended. I understand that COVID delayed, like it's delayed a lot of things when it comes to capital projects, delayed some of the projects when it comes to this building, but that will be oversubscribed for this coming year. So those projects will be completed and the entire $10 million will be expended, and then likely future governments will have to look at what other things have to be done in this building. But it's always difficult, whether you're in Ottawa and it's Parliament, or you're talking about 24 Sussex, these sort of historical old structures that are difficult to maintain, but are part of a province's or federation's history, are important to be maintained. So there's a cost, and sometimes there's a political turbulence to be paid for that, but I think it's important. So I'm glad the member raised it. I think he probably shares the same views about the beauty of this building and the need to maintain it and to ensure that it is sound for future generations.
Are there any further questions? Okay, hearing no further questions, we will now proceed to consideration of resolutions. At this point, I will allow all virtual members to unmute their mics so that they can respond to the question. I will now call Resolution 22.2. Be it resolved that there be granted Her Majesty a sum not exceeding $3,187,000 for legislative and public affairs, corporate services for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed. So the last item to be considered for these estimates is item 22.1A, the minister's salary, contained in resolution 22.1. The floor is now open for questions.
At this point, we have staff. Don't we have staff?
Okay, so we just clarify, because we are discussing the minister's salary, we will ask the staff to remove themselves from the table, please. Okay, seeing no questions, resolution 22.1, be it resolved that there be granted to Her Majesty, a sum not exceeding $883,000 for legislative and public affairs executive for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed.
Okay.
So at this time, this completes the estimates of the Department of Legislative and Public Affairs. Do we rise or what do we do?
Well, are we going on to the next department? What's the order?
There should be. Is it, shall we take a brief recess to allow the next department and critics to come in and set up? So agreed, we stand in recess. Okay, order. The Committee of Supply is back in session. And the hour being 6 o'clock, committee rise.